He hadn't planned what he would say. 5 years of silence, a billion-dollar empire, boardrooms on 3 continents, covers of magazines he never actually read, and now, here, on a gravel path in Bay Ridge, Brooklyn, with the smell of fallen leaves and coffee cart steam drifting through the cool October air, a 4-year-old boy with his eyes, his jaw, his exact face was walking straight toward him like the universe had finally decided he'd hidden long enough. The boy stopped, tilted his head, looked up with a fearless, unblinking assessment that only very small children and apex predators can manage without effort. "Are you our daddy?" No tremble in the voice, no fear, no performance, just the ruthless, uncomplicated honesty of a child who had a question and saw absolutely no reason not to ask it. Dominic Hartwell, the man who had never flinched in a boardroom, who had never lost a deal he truly wanted, who had not said "I'm sorry" to another human being since the day his father's casket was lowered into the ground at age 19, felt every layer of armor he had spent 3 decades constructing simply dissolve, gone, all of it, in 4 words from a boy who weighed 40 pounds. He crouched, looked the child in the eye, felt the full weight of 5 years settle onto his shoulders like a coat he would wear for the rest of his life. And this is where the story really begins. Not at the gala, though that was where he first saw her again. Not in the boardroom, though that was where the real battle was fought. Not even in the letter he slid under her door at midnight, hands steadier than they had any right to be. It began here, on a gravel path in a park, with a boy named Elijah who had his father's eyes and his mother's courage and absolutely no patience for grown-ups who took too long to find their way home. The Hartwell Charity Gala was the kind of event that demanded perfection, and Dominic Hartwell had never been anything less. He stood near the bar in the grand ballroom of the St. Regis Hotel in Manhattan, a crystal glass of Macallan 18 in one hand, the other resting with practiced ease on the small of Vivian Caldwell's back. It was a gesture that looked like intimacy, but was closer to architecture, the way you might rest a hand on a wall to indicate ownership of the room. Vivian understood this. It was frankly one of the things he appreciated about her. She asked nothing of him that he wasn't already performing. Vivian Caldwell was exactly what his mother called suitable, sharp-boned, polished, the only daughter of Senator Robert Caldwell of Connecticut, and constitutionally unbothered by Dominic's emotional unavailability. She wore a champagne column gown and spoke in the low, cultured cadences of a woman who had attended the right schools, summered in the right places, and understood instinctively that a man like Dominic Hartwell was to be managed, not loved. She was discussing the Mercer acquisition, with the focused detachment of a woman reading a prospectus. He was half listening. The gala hummed magnificently around them. Crystal chandeliers, the size of small cars, scattered light across 500 of New York's wealthiest citizens. The floral arrangements alone had cost more than most Americans made in a month. Journalists were stationed near the velvet ropes with the patient, predatory stillness of wildlife photographers. Waiters moved through the crowd in their white gloves and black jackets like elegant ghosts, lifting empty glasses and replacing them with full ones in a seamless choreography no one was supposed to notice. Dominic noticed everything. He always had. It was the quality that had made him dangerous in business. This ability to track multiple currents in a room simultaneously, to feel the shift of momentum before anyone else registered it. He had built Hartwell Capital on that instinct. A mid-tier investment firm he had acquired at 26, with borrowed money and borrowed confidence, turned into a billion-dollar private equity empire by sheer, relentless, occasionally ruthless attention. He was 34 years old. He had appeared on 3 magazine covers in the last 18 months, twice in a suit, once in a profile piece that his publicist had titled The Quiet Predator, and that he had never actually read past the first paragraph. He owned a penthouse in Tribeca, with views that people described as cinematic, a villa outside Florence that he visited perhaps 4 days a year, an apartment in London he used mostly as a tax consideration. He was by every measurable standard victorious. And yet, the feeling had been there for 5 years. That particular restlessness, not dissatisfaction exactly, nothing so clean as that, but the persistent, low-grade sense of something crucial mislaid, like a number that doesn't quite reconcile on a balance sheet. You keep scanning the columns, you keep coming up wrong, and you can't move forward until you find the error. He had never been able to name what was missing. He had tried in his way, working longer hours, taking bigger risks, adding properties and accolades and Vivian Caldwell's, but the feeling persisted, quiet and immovable, like a stone in a shoe you've learned to walk around. He was scanning the room again, a habit, automatic, and when the motion caught him. A flash of burgundy near the east wall. A woman in a server's uniform moving with quick, deliberate efficiency between the guests, collecting empty champagne flutes onto a tray she balanced on her left hand. Her dark hair was swept back into a neat bun at her nape. Her face was turned away, 3/4 profile, and there was something in the set of her shoulders, straight, composed, carrying a quiet dignity that no service uniform could suppress, that made Dominic's hand tighten almost imperceptibly around his glass. He looked back at Vivian. He looked at the woman again. Something tightened in the center of his chest. The specific electric sensation he associated with markets about to move. Every instinct firing at once. All of them saying, "Pay attention. Something is happening." She turned. The glass very nearly slipped from Dominic Hartwell's hand. It was Camille. Camille Reeves stood 20 feet away from him, real and breathing and present in a way that felt almost physically impossible, as though she had stepped out of a memory he hadn't realized he was still keeping. She had the same wide, dark brown eyes, the ones that had always seemed to see things other people missed. The same composed, precise set of her jaw, the same quality of stillness she carried in her body, that sense of someone who had decided long ago not to waste motion. She was thinner than he remembered. There were shadows beneath her eyes that hadn't been there 5 years ago, the kind that come not from illness but from sustained, cumulative exhaustion, the kind you earn. But it was her. It was unmistakably entirely her. The woman he had loved, though he had not used that word then, had not allowed himself the word then, for 2 years before he had ended things with the clean efficiency of a man who believed he was being practical. The woman who had written him a letter afterward that he still had somewhere, in a drawer he never opened, that he had read and reread until the paper softened at the folds. The woman who had then apparently vanished from the earth. He had not looked for her. That had been the point. You ended things. You moved forward. You did not look. He was still staring, and he, who was never caught staring at anything, when he heard it, laughter. Light layered overlapping, the specific bright chaos of children who did not know or care that they were supposed to be quiet. He turned his head toward the sound almost before he decided to, following it to the wide corridor beyond the ballroom's double doors, which stood open to allow the waitstaff to pass, and the floor shifted beneath his feet. 4 children stood in the corridor. 4. They were small, very small, perhaps 3 or 4 years old, dressed in mismatched, slightly rumpled outfits that had clearly not been chosen for a gala. A red sweater, a striped shirt, small sneakers, one pair with a blinking light in the sole. They were playing some game that involved a great deal of running in short, bursts and whispering and suppressed, delighted giggling, and they were entirely, blissfully unaware of the 500 adults in the next room. They were, in all probability, the children of someone on the catering staff, someone who'd had no childcare for the evening, and had brought them along and tucked them in the corridor with the instruction to be quiet and good. Dominic Hartwell registered all of this in approximately 1 second. What took considerably longer was what came after. He looked at the children. He really looked. And felt, for the first time in his adult life, something that was not strategy, not calculation, not the controlled processing of data, but pure white obliterating shock. They had his jaw, the strong squared line of it slightly cleft. They had his deep-set eyes, the particular dark brown that his mother called black in dim light. They had his brow line on that straight, architectural ridge that every photographer he'd ever worked with had called commanding, and that he had simply always thought of as his face. The tallest of them, a boy, had a cowlick at the left temple that rose in a small, stubborn wave that Dominic had spent 34 years pressing down every single morning. Quadruplets. 4 of them. The certainty arrived not as a thought but as a physical event. A drop in his blood pressure, a ringing in his ears, the room contracting to a single point of focus. Dominic? Vivian's voice came from somewhere to his left, carefully modulated with concern. You've gone completely white. Excuse me, he said. The words came from some automatic part of him that was still functioning. He set his glass down on the tray of a passing waiter without looking at either the glass or the waiter. He watched Camille move through the room with her tray, never once glancing in his direction. And why would she? She didn't know he was here. She thought probably that she was working a gala in a city of 8 million people on an unremarkable Friday night. She reached the corridor doors. She crouched at the children's level, and he could not hear what she said, but he watched her face as she said it. The particular expression of a person who is exhausted and tender and present all at once, who has been saying the same gentle things in the same patient voice for years and has not yet run out of them. She gathered the children and guided them further down the corridor with a hand on small shoulders, her tray balanced in the other hand, moving with the practiced efficiency of a woman who had learned to do everything with her hands full. Dominic did not follow her, not yet. He stood in the center of the most prestigious charity gala in Manhattan, in a suit that cost $4,000, surrounded by 500 people who considered him one of the most powerful men in the room, and he understood with the cold, stripping clarity that had made him exceptional at his work that his life had just divided itself permanently into before and after. He did not know yet what the after looked like. He knew only that it had 4 faces. 4 faces that were also his face, and that somewhere in this building, the woman who had made that possible was carrying a tray of empty champagne, flutes, and had no idea he had seen. By 10 o'clock the following morning, Marcus Webb was sitting across from Dominic in the glass-walled boardroom of Hartwell, Capital's Midtown offices, a manila folder on the table between them. Marcus Webb was 41, slight and possessed of a stillness that people frequently mistook for passivity until they realized, usually too late, that he had been 3 moves ahead since the beginning of the conversation. He had been Dominic's right-hand man for 7 years. He had managed hostile acquisition leaks, regulatory investigations, and one extremely delicate situation involving a European investor and a Zurich hotel that they had agreed never to discuss again. He was methodical, discreet, and constitutionally allergic to drama, which made him, in the present situation, precisely invaluable. He slid the folder across the table without preamble and folded his hands in his lap. Dominic opened it. Inside was a profile assembled in less than 12 hours. Dominic had learned long ago not to ask how Marcus obtained his information. He simply knew that when Marcus produced a document, it was accurate, and accuracy was the only currency that mattered to him in any transaction. Camille Reeves, 32, born in Atlanta, Georgia, currently residing at a 3rd-floor walk-up apartment in Bay Ridge, Brooklyn. She had left New York 5 years ago, 2 months after Dominic had ended their relationship. The folder noted with no particular inflection, and had spent 11 months in Charlotte, North Carolina, where she had a cousin. She had returned to New York when the children were 14 months old. She had worked, since her return, 2 jobs simultaneously, mornings and early afternoons as a home health aide for the Sunrise Home Care Agency in Sunset Park, evenings and weekends as a banquet server for Prestige Event Staffing, the catering company that held the service contract for the St. Regis, the Plaza, and 4 other Midtown properties. The children were named Ava, Zoe, Noah, and Elijah Reeves, quadruplets, born at New York Presbyterian Hospital 4 years and 3 months ago. Camille had given birth at 32 weeks. The folder contained a brief notation about the NICU stay, a month of it, and Dominic had to stop and set the paper down for a moment and look out the window at Park Avenue, and all 4 had been discharged healthy. She had listed no father on any of the birth certificates. Marcus cleared his throat quietly. Her combined income from both positions runs approximately $38,000 a year, he said, before taxes. She qualifies for several assistance programs but is not enrolled in most of them. There's a note in the file. I believe she doesn't want the paperwork trail. Dominic looked up from the folder. He said nothing. 4 children, he said finally. 4 children, Marcus confirmed. He paused, watching his employer's face with the careful attention of someone who has seen that face in many difficult moments and understands which silences to leave intact. She's behind on utilities. Con Ed sent a notice last month, which she paid before it escalated. The children share the 1 bedroom. She uses the living room as her own sleeping space. A cot behind the couch. Dominic closed the folder. He stood and walked to the floor-to-ceiling window that made up the north wall of the boardroom. Far below, Park Avenue moved in its relentless mid-morning patterns. Yellow taxis, black SUVs, the occasional bike messenger threading the gaps with the casual Fatalism of the deeply committed. He had stood at this window hundreds of times. He had looked down at that street and felt the particular satisfaction of elevation, of being above the churn, of having built something that put him here and kept him here. This morning he pressed 2 fingers against the glass and felt nothing of the kind. A cot behind the couch. She was sleeping on a cot behind the couch so that 4 children could have a bedroom. 4 children who carried his blood, his face, his genetic architecture, who looked at the world through his eyes were being raised on $38,000 a year by a woman working 2 jobs with no days off and apparently too much pride to enroll in the assistance programs she qualified for. He had spent $42,000 on a watch last spring. He had not thought about that watch since the day he bought it. The fury that moved through him was not clean. He knew it wasn't clean. Part of it was the protective instinct, raw, primal, the territorial surge of a man who has just learned that his children exist and are not being adequately provided for. Part of it was something closer to guilt, which he identified with the reluctant precision of a man who does not often permit himself the experience. And underneath both of those, quiet and difficult and not yet fully formed, was something that felt like grief. For the years, for the cot, for the NICU month she had endured alone, for the 1,000 unremarkable hard days she had navigated without a single call from him, because he had not known to make one, because she had decided he didn't need to know. He was not sure yet whether he was angry at her for that. He suspected the answer was complicated and that he would not find it this morning. Marcus spoke from behind him, careful and even. "What would you like me to do, Dominic?" Dominic turned from the window. His face had settled into the expression his board knew well, the one that appeared before the most consequential decisions of his career. Not cold exactly, focused. Look of a man who has identified what matters and is now arranging everything else accordingly. Find out her schedule. Both jobs, I want to know when she's at the home care agency and when she's off. He moved back to the table, picked up his phone. Send flowers to Vivian. Something appropriate and generous. Tonight's dinner is canceled. Marcus raised one eyebrow, the single expressive gesture he permitted himself. The Westbridge pre-dinner. The Caldwells will be disappointed, Dominic said. I'm aware. Have my assistant send the apology. A measured pause. And the reason I give for the cancellation? Family matter, Dominic said. The phrase sat in the room between them. Marcus, who had known Dominic for 7 years and had never once heard him use those 2 words together in that combination, absorbed this without comment. He simply nodded, collected his folder, and said, I'll have the schedule by this afternoon. After Marcus left, Dominic sat alone in the boardroom for a long time. The city moved below him. The phone on the table blinked with messages he did not answer. He thought about a girl in Charlotte, 11 months pregnant, alone. He thought about 4 tiny faces in a hospital NICU, each one small enough to hold in one hand. He thought about a woman assembling a life out of $38,000 in sheer, unyielding stubbornness, making it look from the outside like it was fine, like she had it, like she didn't need anything from anyone, especially not from him. He thought about that for a very long time. The Sunrise Home Care Agency operated out of a narrow storefront office on 43rd Street in Sunset Park, sandwiched between a laundromat and a Colombian bakery whose exhaust fan perfumed the entire block with the smell of fresh bread and cinnamon every morning. Camille Reeves had worked this block long, enough that she knew the rhythms of it the way you know the rooms of a house you've lived in for years, where the light falls at noon, which crack in the sidewalk catches water when it rains, the precise angle at which you have to hold the agency's front door to stop it sticking. She clocked out at noon on Tuesdays, signed her timesheet, exchanged a few words with Delia at the front desk, who always asked about the kids, and then walked 3 blocks to the corner deli on 45th, where Raymond, behind the counter, already had her order ready. Black coffee, sesame bagel, light cream cheese, and by the time she pushed through the door, it was not a luxury exactly. It was the 12-minute interlude between one obligation and the next. The small deliberate pause she had learned to protect because, without it, the days blurred into one continuous forward motion with no seam and no breath. She ate the bagel on the walk. She drank the coffee while it was still hot. She got to the daycare at 12:40 and was always on time. She had just stepped out of the deli, cup warm in both hands, steam curling up against the cold, when she walked directly into Dominic Hartwell. He was standing on the sidewalk as if he belonged there, or rather, as if the sidewalk had simply been waiting for him and was unsurprised by his arrival. Tall, immaculate in a charcoal wool overcoat with the collar up against the wind, dark eyes already fixed on her with the kind of focused, unwavering attention that had once made her feel, quite literally, like the only person in any room. He looked the same. He looked, if possible, better. The years had given him a gravity that his 30s hadn't quite carried yet, something settled and certain in the way he held himself that made him more, not less, arresting. She hated him. Very briefly and very specifically for that, Camille Reeves stopped walking. She did not drop her coffee. She did not gasp or step back, or allow her face to do anything she had not decided it should do. She looked at him for exactly 2 seconds, long enough to confirm, to absorb, to bring every resource she had to the surface. And then she said, in a voice that was perfectly, almost artificially even, "Hello, Dominic?" Something moved in his face. She couldn't name it and didn't try. "We need to talk," he said. "I'm on a schedule," she replied and began walking. "Camille." It was the way he said it, not loud, not commanding. Just her name, spoken with a weight and a precision that it had never had in anyone else's mouth. The sound of a person who knew exactly what they were saying and meant every syllable of it. Her feet slowed before she made the decision to slow them. She stopped. She turned back. She looked at him squarely. She had rehearsed this conversation approximately 400 times over 5 years. Not compulsively, and she was not a woman who indulged in compulsion, but it had come to her, the way unavoidable things do, in the spaces between other things. Late at night, when she finally lay down on the cot in the apartment, was quiet, and the only sounds were the children breathing in the next room, and the particular creak the radiator made at 2 a.m. She had rehearsed it in the shower. She had rehearsed it on the subway, staring at her own reflection in the dark window. She had rehearsed it sick with fever when Noah had an ear infection and she'd sat up all night with him and had nothing to do but think. She had imagined it every possible way. She had imagined crumbling, had sometimes, in the darkest and most honest moments, wanted to crumble, wanted to let someone else hold the weight for 5 minutes. She had imagined fury. She had imagined dissolving into every complicated, still unresolved feeling she had spent 5 years folding, carefully down and pressing flat, beneath the weight of routine and necessity. She had not, in any version of the rehearsal, chosen to crumble. "There is nothing to talk about," she said. Her voice was even. Her hands around the coffee cup were warm and steady. "And I'd appreciate you not coming to my workplace, Dominic." I saw the children. The words dropped between them like stones into still water. She said nothing. She let the silence hold. "I saw them at the gala." He took a step toward her. She did not step back. "4 children who look exactly like me." "You had 4 children and you never told me." "You had 4 children, Camille. 4. And I have been completely, entirely absent from their lives for 4 years because you decided. Because you told me," she said. The quiet in her voice stopped him. Not because it was cold, and it wasn't cold, which was the thing that made it stop him. It was simply clear. The clarity of a woman who has had years to arrive at the truth of something and is no longer afraid of it. "You told me," she said again. I believe the words were, and I remember them quite precisely, because I have had a great deal of time to remember them, that you didn't have the capacity for what I was asking, that I was asking too much, that your life was structured in a way that didn't accommodate the kind of future I was describing. Those were your words. "I know what I said," he said quietly. "Then you understand why I made the choices I made." She held his gaze without flinching. "I found out I was pregnant 2 weeks after that conversation." 2 weeks.
"I thought about calling you."
"I thought about it for a very long time. And then I thought about what you had just finished telling me, about your capacity, about your structure, about accommodation, and I decided I was not going to go back to you with 4 children as a bargaining chip. I was not going to make you feel trapped into a life you'd already told me, clearly and directly, that you did not want. They are my children," he said. And there it was, the rawness she hadn't prepared for. Underneath the words, like a current under still water, She felt it, and she did not let herself respond to it, not yet. She was not ready to respond to it yet. "They are my children," she returned, and her voice was quiet and completely firm. "They have been my children every single day of their lives. Every fever at 3 a.m, every nightmare, every fall, every first word and first step that I watched alone. Every month I sat down with the numbers and figured out how to make it work. They are mine. They are whole and loved and completely fine, and they do not need you to arrive now because your conscience finally caught up to your ambition." The words landed. She watched them land, watched the slight tightening around his eyes, the almost imperceptible shift in his jaw. Something moved across his face that was not anger, or not only anger, something more layered and more costly than that. Something she might have called shame, if she had let herself believe him capable of it. She had not decided yet whether she believed him capable of it. A woman with a stroller pushed between them on the sidewalk without apology. A bus pulled up to the corner and exhaled its hydraulic breath. The world was busy and indifferent and continued, entirely without reference to what was, happening in this particular 12 feet of Brooklyn pavement. "I'm not going away," Dominic said finally. His voice was quieter now. Not soft. Dominic Hartwell did not do soft, but stripped of the defensive edge, which was something. "That," Camille said, picking up the coffee she had set on the ledge of the building's entrance during the conversation, "is a matter for lawyers. Have yours contact mine. Good afternoon, Dominic." She walked away. She did not look back. She made it to the end of the block. She turned the corner, and then she stopped, pressed her back against the brick wall of the laundromat, and allowed herself exactly 5 deep, deliberate breaths, the kind she had taught herself in the NICU, when she'd sat beside 4 Isolettes and had nothing to do but breathe, and wait and refuse to fall apart. Her hands were shaking, just slightly, just enough to be real. She looked down at them and thought, "You are allowed that. That is allowed." Then she straightened her coat, picked up the pace, and went to get her children. She had not crumbled. She had not dissolved. She had been the woman she had spent 5 years becoming, and that woman was enough. She repeated this very quietly, all the way to the daycare. The offices of Hartwell, Capital's legal team, occupied the 42nd floor of a glass tower on Lexington Avenue. The carpet was the color of charcoal. The furniture was low and spare and expensive. The view on a clear day reached across the river. At 9:15 on a Thursday evening, 3 days after the confrontation in Sunset Park, Dominic sat alone at the head of the conference table. His attorneys had left 2 hours ago. The cleaning crew had come and gone. The building was nearly empty. He had not turned on the overhead lights. The city outside the window provided enough. In front of him were 2 documents. The first was a custody petition, 42 pages, drafted by the best family law team his money could retain, annotated in 3 colors. His senior attorney, a woman named Patricia Oakes, who had litigated custody cases for 22 years and won, the ones that mattered, had told him it was airtight. He had biological proof. He had resources that dwarfed Camille's by every measurable metric. The courts would grant joint custody at minimum. With the right argument, given his means and her current circumstances, he could petition for primary. He had read the petition twice. He understood every paragraph. The second document was something he had written himself, by hand on a yellow legal pad at 3 o'clock. That morning, when sleep had become clearly impossible, it had taken him 11 drafts and 4 hours to find the language that said what he meant, without saying more than he meant. He had typed the final version himself, because he hadn't wanted anyone else to read it until he was ready. It was a letter to the Hartwell Capital Board of Directors. In it, he proposed restructuring his role, not stepping down. He was not prepared to be dramatic about it, but a significant redistribution of operational control, fewer acquisitions, a longer runway on decisions, the kind of pace that left room, as he had written in the 11th draft, for other priorities. His mother had called 3 times that day. He had let the calls go to voicemail, which was something he had not done since his father's illness. Eleanor Hartwell was not a woman accustomed to voicemail. He had listened to the 3rd message twice. Dominic. Her voice on the recording was composed and precise and very cold. "I've heard things today that concern me greatly. I expect you to call me back before 9. The Caldwells have been patient. But Senator Caldwell's office called my assistant this afternoon. Whatever is occupying your attention, whatever woman or whatever situation, I need you to remember what is at stake with Westbridge. This is not the time for personal disruption. It is never the time for personal disruption. Call me. He had not called her. He sat in the dark now and looked at the custody petition. He could file it. Patricia Oakes was right. He would win. He would have his children in his life, on a court-mandated schedule, in a framework built around his availability and his resources. He would be present. He would provide. He would give them everything that $38,000 a year could not. Private schools, security, the kind of opportunities that doors opened and doors opened onto. He picked up the petition. He held it for a long time. He thought about Camille's face on the sidewalk in Sunset Park. Not the composed mask she had worn during the confrontation, but the moment just before she turned away. The fraction of a second where something had crossed her face that was not anger, not defiance, not the collected Ice Queen performance she had marshaled so impressively, something tired and true and human, which she had not quite managed to conceal in time. A cot behind the couch, a NICU month alone, 11 months in Charlotte near a cousin, because she'd needed someone and he had made himself unavailable, not deliberately, not cruelly, but completely, by ending things before she'd found out she was pregnant. He thought about what it had cost her. Not in money, though God. The money. He could barely think about the money without something in him going cold and sick. But in the other currency, the invisible one, the daily accumulated cost of doing everything alone, of making every decision alone, of sitting in a hospital next to 4 isolates alone and deciding, alone, that she was not going to call him because she was not going to do that to him. She had decided from the beginning to protect him from the consequences of his own words. He set the petition down. If he filed it now, if he came in with lawyers and motions and the full weight of Hartwell, capital behind him, he would win, and Camille would lose. Not custody necessarily, but something else. The thing she had built. The autonomy she had preserved at enormous cost. The right to have been the one who held this together when he couldn't. He was not going to take that from her because he was angry. He was not going to use power as a substitute for the apology he actually owed. He picked up his phone. He called Marcus. Marcus answered on the second ring. "Sir, I need you to find me an apartment in Bay Ridge," Dominic said. His voice was steady, steadier in fact than he felt. Nothing flashy. 3 bedrooms, ideally 4, something normal. Month to month initially, and cancel the Westbridge dinner. A silence on the line that carried more information than most people, conveyed in full sentences. Cancel the Dominic, the Caldwells will view that as, I know what they'll view it as. Your mother. I'll handle my mother, he exhaled. And Marcus, I need a family law mediator. Not a litigator, a mediator. Someone who specializes in co-parenting, arrangements where both parties are approaching in good faith. Someone with a reputation for keeping things out of court. Another silence longer. Both parties in good faith, Marcus repeated, with the careful neutrality of a man who is asking a question without asking a question. She gets to decide the terms, Dominic said. She's been making every decision for 4 years without me. I don't get to come in, now with better lawyers and more money and override everything she's built, because I'm angry about choices I partially caused. That's not how I want to enter my children's lives. He heard Marcus breathing on the other end of the line. In 7 years, Marcus had never said anything that could be categorized as emotionally significant. He managed information and logistics and the occasional small miracle of discretion. He did not editorialize. What he said now was simply, I'll have the apartment options to you by morning, and the mediator's name by noon. Thank you, Dominic said. And Dominic? Yes, a beat. For what it's worth, I think this is right. He hung up before Dominic could respond to that. Which was, Dominic thought, the most Marcus thing Marcus had ever done. He went to see Eleanor Hartwell the following morning. He did not call first. He simply arrived at the townhouse on East 73rd Street at 8:45, which was when she took her breakfast, and when the housekeeper opened the door, he said he'd find his own way to the morning room. Eleanor was at the small table by the window with her coffee and the Times, reading in the precise, undecorated way she did everything. She wore a pale blue dressing gown and no jewelry, which was her equivalent of casual. She looked up when he entered. Her face registered his presence without registering surprise. Eleanor Hartwell had not been surprised since approximately 1987. "Sit down," she said. "I'll stand." She looked at him. She folded the Times. "You're going to tell me something I'm not going to like," she said. "Yes." "Then please do it efficiently." "I have 4 children," he said. "Quadruplets. They're 4 years old. Their mother is Camille Reeves." Eleanor set down her coffee cup. She placed both hands flat on the table in front of her and looked at them for a moment. "Camille Reeves," she said. Not a question. A confirmation. "You'll remember her." "I remember her," Eleanor said. "I also remember advising you at the time that she was not an appropriate match, that her background and her expectations were not compatible with what this family requires." "You were wrong," Dominic said, not harshly, simply. The silence that followed was the longest he could remember between them. Eleanor looked up at him. Something moved in her face. The same quality of layered, reluctant recognition he had seen on Camille's face in Sunset Park. On entirely different terms. For entirely different reasons. The look of someone encountering a truth they had hoped to avoid a little longer. "The Westbridge merger," she said finally, "cannot survive a rupture with the Caldwells. Vivian's father has made that entirely." "Then we restructure Westbridge without the Caldwell anchor," Dominic said. "It'll take longer. We'll find other leverage. We've built this company through harder constraints than a broken dinner engagement." Dominic, his mother's voice had the precise temperature it took on when she was about to say something she considered final. "You are talking about sacrificing years of strategic positioning for a woman who left you. Who kept your children from you? Who kept them from me because I told her I didn't have room for a family," he said. His voice did not rise. "Those were my words. She believed them because I meant them. I'm not going to punish her for taking me at my word." Eleanor looked at him for a long time. He let her look. She was 71 years old. She had built this family's position from the respectable ruins of his father's first mismanaged decade, had held the whole architecture of Hartwell, together through the lean years with a combination of social precision and iron will that he had grown up, admiring and occasionally resenting in equal measure. She understood power. She understood what it cost to maintain it and what it cost to surrender it. He watched her weigh all of that against what she saw in his face right now. "You sound," she said finally, and her voice had shifted slightly. Not softer exactly, but different. More interior, like your father. "Before the company became the only thing." Dominic said nothing. He had not expected that. He was not sure now that he could speak without it costing him something. Eleanor looked back at her coffee. She straightened a spoon that did not need straightening. "I will expect to meet them," she said. "When the time is right. When she decides it's appropriate. Not before and not on my schedule." It was not an apology. Eleanor Hartwell did not issue apologies. But it was, Dominic recognized, the closest thing to one she was capable of. A concession to the possibility that she had been wrong about something, delivered in the form of a practical accommodation. "Thank you," he said. He meant it. He wrote the letter by hand. He'd started 3 times, on his laptop, and abandoned all 3 drafts, because they sounded like memos. Structured, efficient, defensible. He didn't want defensible. He wanted true. He slid the envelope under Camille's door at 11:15 on a Friday night. He did not knock. He stood in the corridor of her building for a moment after, 3rd floor walk-up. He had noted the elevator had an out-of-order sign that looked several months old, and listened to the silence on the other side of the door, which was the silence of a household finally asleep, and then he went back down the stairs. She called him 47 hours later. He answered on the first ring. "I read it," she said. Her voice was careful. Not warm. He had not earned warmth. And she was not a woman who gave what hadn't been earned. But careful. Deliberate, the voice of someone choosing each word with intention. It was more than he had expected and exactly what he should have expected from her. "I meant all of it," he said. A pause. "The part where you said you weren't going to file for custody." "I'm not." "The part where you said you moved to Bay Ridge. Signed the lease 3 days ago. 4th floor, 4 blocks from Owl's Head Park." A longer pause. He heard her breathe. "You own a penthouse in Tribeca," she said, and there was something in her voice that was not quite amusement. Not yet, but was somewhere in the territory adjacent to it. Something that was almost the woman he had known. "The penthouse doesn't have a park within walking distance," he said, "and I read in the report Marcus compiled that you take them to Owl's Head on your days off, that they like to run." He heard something on the other end of the line that might have been an exhale, or might have been the beginning of something else quickly controlled. "Noah asked me last week why he doesn't have a daddy," she said. Her voice was quieter now. Underneath the composure, the iron, practiced composure, that he was beginning to understand she had built out of sheer necessity. He could hear the years, the weight of them. All the other children at his daycare have one. He asked if he did something wrong. The sentence reached him somewhere below language. "What did you tell him?" "That some daddies take longer to find their way home," she said. That it was absolutely, completely not his fault. That some grown-ups just get lost. He closed his eyes. The city moved outside his window, his temporary Bay Ridge window. Looking out over rooftops, he was still learning. He said nothing for a moment because he did not trust himself to say anything useful. "Then, I was lost," he said, "for a long time. I'm not going to pretend otherwise or make it sound better than it was. I was lost, and I stayed lost because it was easier and because I was very good at building things that looked like a life without actually being one." Silence. "That's the most honest thing you've ever said to me," she said quietly. "I have a lot of catching up to do." Another silence. Softer this time. A child's voice surfaced briefly in the background, small and sleepy, calling for water, and he heard Camille muffle the phone and respond in the low, unhurried murmur of a parent who has answered 10,000 nighttime requests and lost count, somewhere around month 4. The sound of it was the most ordinary thing he had ever heard, and it went through him like a key turning in a lock he hadn't known was there. Then she was back. "Saturday morning," she said. 9 o'clock. Owl's Head Park, come alone. No entourage. No driver waiting at the gate. "Just me," he said. "Just you," a breath. "And Dominic, wear something you don't mind losing. Elijah is in a mud phase that I have no current strategy for surviving." He almost laughed. The sound that came out of him was rusty and unfamiliar and real in a way. That very little had been real for a very long time. "Understood," he said. Saturday morning arrived gray and cool, with the smell of October water off the bay and the trees in their full, reluctant turning, amber and rust and a deep, saturated gold that the city manages to produce every year in spite of everything. Dominic Hartwell stood at the entrance of Owl's Head Park at 8:47 in dark jeans, a charcoal cable knit sweater, and a coat that had cost him $800 and that he was genuinely, consciously prepared to sacrifice. He had taken the R train from Court Street. He had walked the 4 blocks from the station. He had bought a coffee from the cart near the park entrance that was operated by a man who spoke very little English and made very good coffee, and he had stood here since 8:40, which was not a thing Dominic Hartwell typically did, arrive early and wait, but which felt, this morning, like the only appropriate thing. He watched the park fill with its Saturday morning population, elderly men and women on the walking path, a group of teenagers on the basketball court already arguing about something, 2 women with matching strollers who seemed to know each other and were both talking at once. A dog that was too large for its owner chased a smaller dog that was delighted by this. Somewhere beyond the tree line, the water was visible in small silver flashes. He was watching the dog when he heard them. The sound arrived before they were visible, a particular combination of overlapping voices and running feet and one clear, authoritative voice threading through it all with practiced calm. He turned. They came down the main path at 9:01. Camille was in the center, or rather, she was the point around which 4 small satellites orbited in overlapping, occasionally collision-prone patterns. She had a canvas tote bag over one shoulder and a silver thermos in her other hand, and her hair was down, which he had not seen in years, dark and loose around her shoulders. She was wearing a dark green coat and her cheeks were pink from the cold. She was talking to all 4 of them simultaneously in the multi-channel, apparently effortless way he was. Beginning to understand was one of the core competencies of parenthood, addressing Noah's question about the ducks, redirecting Elijah away from a puddle, confirming to Ava that yes, the swings were definitely there, negotiating with Zoe about something involving her jacket. Two of the children, Ava and Zoe, he was fairly certain, he would learn to distinguish with practice, were holding Camille's hands on either side, fingers wrapped around hers with the unconscious, absolute trust of children who have never had reason to doubt that hand will be there. Noah was several yards ahead, already pointing at the swing set with the focused urgency of a child for whom the swings are a matter of considerable personal importance, and Elijah was crouched at the edge of the path, inches from the puddle he had been redirected away from, studying something in the gravel with the intense, proprietary interest of a naturalist who has made a significant discovery. Dominic stood very still. His heart was doing something he had no language for, not a racing, not an ache, but a kind of full-body rearrangement, as though something that had been arranged, wrong for a long time, was shifting into a configuration that was finally correct. Camille saw him. Their eyes met across 30 feet of park path. She held his gaze for a moment, measuring, weighing, the same precise assessment she had always brought to him, the quality that had once made him feel truly seen and had also, he now understood, terrified him enough that he'd called it incompatibility and walked away. She gave him a small single nod. Then she looked down. "Eli," she said in the particular voice that meant business without urgency, "leave whatever that is alone, please, and come here." Elijah looked up from his discovery with the expression of someone being pulled from an important meeting. He stood. He wiped his hands on his pants, the pants that had probably been clean approximately 11 minutes ago, and turned to see what had interrupted his research. He saw Dominic. He stared, not with fear, there was no fear in it, but with the complete, unguarded attention of a child who has not yet learned to manage his reactions for other people's comfort. He stared the way you stare at something genuinely interesting and new. Then he walked forward, directly, no hesitation. He stopped 2 feet away and looked up. "Are you our daddy?" he asked. 4 words, flat and clear and carrying in their simplicity the entire weight of everything Dominic had done and not done and should have done for 4 years. He crouched. He brought himself to the boy's level. He looked at that face, his face, rendered small and new and entirely its own person, and he felt the last of whatever armor he had been maintaining dissolve completely and without drama, the way ice goes in warm water, not a breaking, a thaw. "Yes," he said. The word was enormous and it was not enough, and it was the only one that mattered. "I am, and I'm very sorry it took me so long to get here." Elijah considered this with the gravity it deserved. He tilted his head. He appeared to be running some internal calculation. Then he reached up, one small, mud-adjacent hand, and patted Dominic's cheek. Twice. With the generous, uncomplicated certainty of a child who has decided the matter is settled. "It's okay," Elijah said. "Mama says grown-ups get lost sometimes. She says the good ones find their way back." Dominic did not trust himself to speak. He looked up at Camille. She was watching from a few feet away, her hands around her thermos, her expression complicated and unresolved and entirely, heartbreakingly human. There was no performance in it, no composed mask, no ice, no careful neutrality, just a woman who was waiting to see what kind of man had arrived. Whether the man she was looking at was the one he was claiming to be, or the one she had known before. He held her gaze. "He found the park," she said softly to Elijah without looking away from Dominic. "He's not lost anymore." From the direction of the swings, "Daddy, push me. Mama said you would push me." Noah's voice, clarion and completely without self-consciousness, rang across the entire park. The elderly couples on the walking path looked over. The women with the strollers looked over. The dog looked over. Dominic stood. He looked at Camille. Her cheeks had gone faintly involuntarily pink. "I told them last night that you were coming," she said very quietly. "That you wanted to meet them. That you were going to be here." She paused. Noah apparently extrapolated. Dominic looked at her. He felt something rise in his chest, warm and ungainly and absolutely real, that he had not felt in so long that it took him a moment to recognize it. This is what had been missing, not a thing he'd mislaid, a person he'd let go. He didn't say any of that. It was too early for any of that. There were months of slow, careful work ahead of them. mediation and school pickups and learning 4 small personalities and rebuilding, something that might not be what it had been but could perhaps become something better. There were conversations he owed her that would take more than a Saturday morning. There was trust to be built from the ground up, because the old trust was gone and they would have to make a new one. He knew all of this. He also knew that Noah was still on the swings. "I should go push my son," he said. And Camille Reeves, who had held everything together for 4 years on her own, who had made every hard choice alone, who had slept on a cot so her children could have a room and had not called him once because she had decided he was not obligated to show up, looked at him and looked at Elijah, and looked at Noah on the swings with his arms out and his face turned toward them. And something in her face opened slightly, like a window in a house that has been closed for a long winter. "Go," she said. And almost as she smiled, he went. Zoe Reeves Hartwell, who had spent the better part of 6 months watching her father with the patient, skeptical attention of a scientist running a very long-term experiment, made her decision on a Saturday in April. The data she had accumulated was as follows. He had shown up every Saturday without exception, including the one where it rained so hard that the park was a small lake and they had stayed in and built a fort out of couch cushions instead. He had learned the difference between her and Ava in approximately 2 weeks, which was faster than most adults managed. He had sat through 17 readings of the same picture, book about a bear who loses his hat, without once appearing to lose his mind, which was more than could be said for Uncle Derek. He had attended Noah's daycare performance of a song cycle about vegetables, a 12-minute experience that could generously be described as experimental, and had filmed all of it and appeared to mean it when he said it was excellent. He had also cried once, when he didn't think anyone was watching on the second Saturday, when Ava fell asleep on the couch with her head on his knee. Zoe had seen. She had filed the information carefully. On this particular Saturday in April, she climbed into his lap at breakfast without preamble, elbowed his plate roughly aside to make room, and announced to her siblings with the authority of someone delivering a verdict. "Daddy makes the best orange juice because he squeezes it himself." Ava pointed out reasonably that Mama had been squeezing orange juice for approximately 4.5 years. Elijah said that was beside the point. Noah was attempting to see how many blueberries fit in his left cheek and was not available for comment. Dominic looked across the table at Camille. She was watching all 4 of them over the rim of her coffee cup with the specific, exhausted, quietly luminous expression of a woman who has been doing the hardest thing in the world for 4.5 years and is beginning, very carefully, to believe that it might be getting easier. Not easy, but easier. She had not moved back to the couch. She had her own room now in the apartment they had quietly, gradually begun to share, the Bay Ridge apartment, with the park view and the kitchen. That was too small for 5 people and perfect because of it. She had not called it a reconciliation. She had not called it anything. She was still not ready to call it anything. He respected that. He was learning to respect a great many things he had not understood before. She caught him looking. She raised an eyebrow. He reached across the table. She looked at his hand for a moment. Just a moment. Then she put hers in it. Outside, the trees in Owl's Head Park were doing what they do every spring. The slow, certain entirely ordinary miracle of beginning again, after everything. Do me a favor. If you enjoyed this story, hit that like button. It genuinely helps the channel. But honestly, don't subscribe unless you truly love the stories we're telling here. And only hit that bell icon if you wanna. You guys are awesome for being here today.